factoring by GCF. So we're going to get started with talking about what a GCF even is. What does it stand for? Greatest common factor. So I'm going to give you two numbers, 12 and 18. And we're going to find the GCF of 12 and 18. And I'm going to show you, you might know this right off the top of your head, you may know it. But I'm going to show you kind of the long roundabout way to find a GCF. We're going to write out all of the ways to multiply to be 12. What are they? 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, and that's it. Okay. 18 is 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. Anything else? No. So the factors that they have in common, they have a 1 in common, they have a 2 in common, a 3, and they have a 6. Of those four numbers, which one is the greatest? 6. Okay. Now, if you know your multiplication facts, this should be easy. You do not have to write this out all the time. Only if you just don't know your multiplication tables. Now, something that's going to be new is when we throw in some variables. So let's say that I have x to the third and x to the fifth. This is a tad different than using just whole numbers. So x to the third means x times x times x. X to the fifth means x, 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 x. Okay. I'm going to circle all of the x's that they have in common. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. They have 3 x's in common, which means the GCF is x to the third. Not bad, right? Okay. You don't have to write this out all the time. It even works if we have multiple variables the same way. So if I have, let's see, if I have x squared y cubed and x y to the fifth. Okay? So that is xx y, y, y. This one is x, y, 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 y. Sounds like a 4-year-old saying y, y, y. So how many x's do they have in common? Just the one. How many y's? 3. 1, 2, 3. So the GCF of this one would be x, y to the third. So we're going to use this. All we're doing are 6 examples together of factoring by GCF. Now when I say we factor by GCF, that means we find the GCF, but we also have to write beside of it what's left over when I take out the GCF. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's start here with 12x cubed plus 2x. So what is the GCF of 12 and 2? What can you divide them both by? 2. And then I have x cubed and x. What do they have in common? Just one of the x's. So my GCF is 2x. That's not my complete answer. What I have to do is I'm going to take each of these and divide them both by 2x. And that's going to go in parentheses beside of my GCF. We're basically taking out or dividing out the GCF. So what's 12 divided by 2? 6. And then I have x cubed, but I took out one of those x's.
So it's just x.
Leaves me with what? X squared. Yep. And then I had a 2. What's 2 divided by 2? 1. And then the x's, they both cancel, right? So it's just plus 1. And it's really easy to check your answer. You're going to type in your original problem, 12x to the third plus 2x, and you're going to get some random number. Doesn't matter what that number is. And then you're going to type in your answer. And see if they match. If they match, you're good. Okay. Any questions? All right, number 2. So let's start with finding the GCF. 14 and 7. The GCF is 7. You can divide both of those by 7.
How do you figure out GCF?
Well, 14, how do you multiply to get 14? Start with 1. 1 and 14, what else? 2 and 7. And then how do you multiply to get 7? 1 and 7. So they have a 1 in common. They have a 7 in common. I want the greatest, the biggest. And then how many x's do they have in common? 8. X to the 8th. If I were to write out 8 x's on top, write out 11 x's and circle, I would be able to circle 8 times. Just like I did right here. So I have 7x to the 8th. Then I have to figure out what's going to be left. And I do that by dividing out my GCF. What's 14 divided by 7? 2. And then what about x's? They all cancel, so there's none left. Okay. What's negative 7 divided by 7? I have a minus negative 1. And then how many x's? 3. Yep, x to the third. You do not have to put that 1. You can just put minus x to the third.
Where are the numbers in parentheses come from?
By dividing. I took my original problem and divided my GCF. Okay. Any questions? All right, number 3. This time I have 3 terms. It's fine. You just have to find what all 3 have in common. Okay, so if you want to write out your 3 numbers, you can. Okay. So 36 is 1, 36, 2, 18. I'm going to run out of room. 3, 12, 4 and 9, and then you have 6 and 6. So all of those are factors of 36. 14 would be 1 and 14, 2 and 7. 18 is 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. So they all have 1s in common. They all have 2s in common. Nothing else. So the GCF of those 3 numbers is 2. What about the x's? How many do they all 3 have in common?
1.
That 18 doesn't have any. So they don't have, all three of them don't have any x's in common. So the GCF, I don't even have an x. I'm just going to do a 2. Which means I'm going to divide all three of these terms by 2. What's 36 divided by 2? 18. And since I didn't divide out any of the x's, I still have x to the third. Plus 7x plus 9. Good. Any questions? Number 4. So here's something I'm going to add in. If with a negative. If the very beginning is a negative, then your GCF has to include the negative. So if you have a negative in the very, very front, your GCF is going to be negative. Then what's the GCF of 15 and 24? 3. And then how many x's? Just the one x. Yep. So my GCF is negative 3x. So I'm going to divide both of those by negative 3x. What's negative 15 divided by negative 3? Positive 5. And then how many x's? I have an x squared. I had x cubed. I took out one of the x's, which left me x squared. Okay. 24 divided by negative 3 is a negative 8. What about the x's?
They cancel each other out.
They cancel. Yep.
What was the GCF?
What made
Negative
it? Did the negative make the 5x squared? Does that make that the minus 8? Why isn't it the plus 8?
Because if the GCF is negative, so when we divide a positive 24 by a negative 3,
Oh, okay, I got it.
that was a negative 8. Okay. All right, number 5. What is the GCF of 2, 6, and 4? 2. How many x's do they all three have in common?
1.
1. The middle one just has 1. So I can only circle up to one time.
You said an X? Well, don't they all have an X on them?
Yeah, they all have an x.
They all have an x, but yeah. But I only put 1 because we have an x cubed, we have an x, and we have an x squared. So I can only circle one time. So only one x. Which means I'm going to divide all three of these by 2x. Oh man, I just realized I flipped my color.
I saw that I didn't get a calculator.
That's annoying.
1.
1. And then cubed, and I divided out one of the x's. So what am I left with? X to the second. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. How many x's? None of them. They only had 1. I canceled out 1. And then 4 divided by 2 is plus 2. Do I have any x's? One of them, yep. Alright. And number 6. It's 15, 3, and 5.
It's one.
Because nothing goes.
Nothing is shared between a 3 and a 5 other than 1. So your GCF is a 1. And then how many x's? Yep. So my GCF is x squared. You do not have to put the 1. You can if it makes you feel better. So I'm going to divide each of those by x squared. And essentially I'm dividing by 1 x squared. So what's 15 divided by 1? 15. And then I have x to the 4th. Plus what? 3x plus 5. Good.